Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Brilliant. So, as a TV channel, AMC has seen its viewership slowly but surely decline in the past 6 years or so, which might be bad, but it's definitely not unique. TV ratings are falling across the board as more and more viewers opt for streaming or just other forms of entertainment. That's the reality of being a basic cable channel in 2021. It's a sinking ship that's slowly being transitioned away from. Just look at FX basically becoming a prestige brand within Hulu. So I can't totally blame the falling ratings on AMC themselves. But to me at least, there's no denying that what has happened to AMC in the past decade or so has been one of the saddest stories in the TV industry. A channel that at one point seemed poised to build a legendary stable of shows that could stand toe-to-toe with the likes of HBO. And that's the story I want to cover this week. How AMC went from the promising upstart in scripted shows to running on zombified fumes, give or take a Better Call Saul.
I was out partying, minding my own business.
You are under arrest.
I'd better call Saul.
Originally known for airing classic movies, it's often said that AMC began its original scripted programming with the biggest one-two punch in TV history: Mad Men and Breaking Bad. Now, this isn't exactly true. AMC had been experimenting with scripted programming for years. There were comedies like Remember When in 1996, which was aimed kind of at older viewers who would have been tuning in for the classic Hollywood films. It's a dramedy set at a radio station during the Second World War. And honestly, it's kind of an overlooked gem. Like, it's not the best show of the 90s or anything, and it ended really abruptly, but it's pretty charming in a way that I think mostly holds up. You also have things like the forgettable The Lot and a miniseries directed by the legendary Walter Hill, which came out a year before Mad Men. But when it comes to talking about AMC as we think of it today, Mad Men is the show that made them a prestige destination. That first season kind of struck gold, with critics at least. The ratings were actually pretty anemic, averaging about 900,000 viewers per episode, which wasn't great in 2007. Those numbers would only grow though, as the series went on to become one of the defining shows of the 2000s. In retrospect, season 1 of the show does have some signs of growing pains. It's far more on the nose than Mad Men would become in the future, but it felt like nothing else on basic cable at the time, and would only get more confident as the seasons continued. Breaking Bad would arrive the next year, and after that, AMC, the channel, was definitely on the radar of TV fans everywhere. Like Mad Men, the first season of Breaking Bad feels a little less sophisticated than the pulpy masterpiece it would eventually become. Don't get me wrong, it was always a blast to watch and moved like a freight train, but the characterization was a little bit more cartoonish that first year. Just look at Skyler's confrontation with Jesse Pinkman in the second episode. It's played really broadly, in a way that the show probably wouldn't do with that character in like season 4. Now, I don't bring this up to attack Breaking Bad or Mad Men, just to point out that I really think season 1 of both shows really function as an interesting historical artifact. Look at the rest of the basic cable landscape in 2006, that year before Mad Men hit. The channel doing best was USA, with breezy, light procedurals like Psych and Monk, both really likable shows that I watched a ton of, but about as far from the existential complexity of Mad Men or the expertly constructed crime novel plotting of Breaking Bad as you could possibly get. Sure, stuff like FX's The Shield did exist on basic cable, but it was the exception, not the rule. So over the course of season 2 and beyond, you really see the two shows become more and more confident in their own approach. Both shows could be extremely funny when they wanted to be, but they leaned less on obvious gags like, hey, weren't the 60s crazy, or dorky people in the suburbs trying to be cool. And in the process, they went from 2 low-rated shows on a mid-tier cable station to some of the most awarded and beloved series to ever air on American television. Mad Men and Breaking Bad helped usher in a new era of basic cable programming. In the mid-2010s, every C-list channel like the Audience Network or WGN were suddenly shifting gears into the buzzy, awards-filled world of the prestige or pulp drama. I mean, who could forget shows like Salem or Kingdom? Well, most people it seems like, because most of the would-be Breaking Bads of this era never really got much traction. Like, Kingdom was a fairly well-reviewed show that starred Frank Grillo and Nick Jonas, and it ran for 3 seasons, and I'm pretty sure I've never met anyone in real life who watched this thing. AMC, on the other hand, kind of seemed above all that, at least for a while. While their 2 crown jewels were still early on in their run in 2010, they launched Rubicon, a great but severely underseen show that harkened back to the paranoid conspiracy thrillers of the 70s, like Parallax View. Critics were more mixed on it than I was, with many calling the show boring. With it not taking off with viewers and not garnering awards, the show was quietly put out to pasture. Now maybe Rubicon was too cerebral and not audience friendly enough, but no one could accuse AMC's next show of that. The Walking Dead premiered October 31st, 2010, and this show was kind of a hit. And you probably don't need me to tell you what came next. Mad Men and Breaking Bad had solid viewership and were critical darlings, but The Walking Dead was a phenomenon. Based on Robert Kirkman's comic and developed by Shawshank Redemption director Frank Darabont, The Walking Dead seemed like it was ready to fuse the smart writing and great production that AMC was becoming known for with one of the most popular and beloved horror subgenres out there. At the time, I really loved the comic. I really remember premiere night feeling like an event, and the pilot lived up to it. This was the zombie show that people had been waiting for. And then, well, okay, here's the thing. I loved the first episode of The Walking Dead, and I liked the rest of the season, but I was definitely in the first wave of people to fall off that show. I was annoyed by the glacial pace of Season 2, and how mishandled I thought characters that I really liked from the comics, like Dale, were. I decided to bail on the show. I would check in occasionally, like I remember watching big chunks of the Governor arc, but it was never like Breaking Bad, which I also watched the night it premiered on AMC and never missed an episode after. Obviously, The Walking Dead was and is AMC's biggest financial success. It's a cash cow that they won't stop milking. There's tons of spin-offs, many of which are still being planned. They're claiming they're going to do a trilogy of Rick movies, and it's also a merchandising powerhouse. This was everything a cable network could possibly want from a show. And you know what? I'm gonna kind of argue that this was the reason the era of AMC I found most creatively exciting was strangled in its cradle. It may have looked and sounded the part of an AMC show, but in many ways, The Walking Dead was kind of the exact opposite of its earlier originals. Mad Men, Breaking Bad, Rubicon, these were all intensely creator-driven shows. The creator of Breaking Bad, Vince Gilligan, has praised AMC's hands-off approach, even in those crucial early days when the show is figuring itself out. Gilligan and the writers sat down, hammered out exactly what they wanted to do, and that's what ended up on the screen. They would even experiment with different creative processes for different seasons. Like Season 2 was intensely planned out from the start, down to each story beat, whereas the final season they tried to introduce more spontaneity. When they wrote the scenes that revealed the gun in the back of Walt's car, they literally didn't even know what they were going to do with it. They decided to challenge themselves to come up with an answer that they and their audience would find satisfying. It was a team of old X-Files vets and talented new faces getting to flex their creative muscles in a way that wasn't often allowed, especially on network television. The Walking Dead is a different story. Darabont was fired after Season 1, which resulted in a really nasty lawsuit. And since then, 3 other people have run the show at different times. Add to that the influence of comic creator Robert Kirkman, and you just have a mess of wildly different kinds of writers coming in and just trying to keep this money train chugging. As a result, it never felt very coherent to me in the way that the comics did. Now, I eventually fell off the comics too, but they were undeniably Robert Kirkman. The brutal deaths, the mean-spirited twists, the almost nihilistic tone. To me, the show always just kind of felt like a watered-down version of that. A show that knows it's expected to be audacious and shocking, but doesn't really have any creative goal beyond keeping the narrative alive and functioning. To me at least, the show often feels like an endless game of repositioning the players on the board, but not for any particular purpose. The impact of The Walking Dead on the rest of AMC's lineup wouldn't really become obvious for another couple years, as it took some time to greenlight and create more action-filled genre shows. In the meantime, AMC gave us The Killing in 2010, the official show of people being very, very sad while it rains. Based on a Danish series, The Killing proved to be a nice little hit, the second biggest premiere AMC had ever had after The Walking Dead. It did well, for the first season at least. See, The Killing, to me, always felt like a show that was kind of built for one season, maybe two at most. It made it to 4, but only after being cancelled and then uncancelled for a 6-episode wrap-up season. It was never a great show, but it was fine. They had a bit more success later that year with their western Hell on Wheels. It was never beloved by critics who like to negatively compare it to Deadwood. It was also expensive, and like The Walking Dead, it had to switch out showrunners. But I actually think it was usually a pretty decent show, and it proved to be a solid, if not huge success for AMC. Low Winter Sun, on the other hand, that was a problem. A crime series set in Detroit, before it premiered, this show seemed to be getting the rollout to be the next Mad Men, proving that AMC wasn't just the zombie channel, that they could produce thoughtful shows that tackled big issues. The problem was that to critics, it mostly played like a stale imitation of shows that did that well. This wasn't The Wire, it felt more like The Shield's dumb younger brother, but, without any of the fun that might imply. It lasted 10 episodes and quietly vanished, taking a little bit of AMC's credibility with it. This isn't to say that AMC hasn't made great shows since. It has. Halt and Catch Fire, Lodge 49, The Terror, and of course Better Call Saul have all proven that it can still develop fantastic material. But with the exception of Saul, which is obviously more well known because it's a spinoff of Breaking Bad, they kind of can't get these shows on people's radar anymore. Halt and Catch Fire suffered from a couple things, a really terrible title and a so-so first season, before having a great run, but it just never really made waves, and it felt like it was on the bubble for cancellation basically every season. Lodge 49 was a really interesting series that combines the mystery of a show like Lost with a hangout sitcom vibe, but more grounded than either of those things would imply. And it was one of the lowest rated shows ever on AMC, barely sneaking in a second season before getting cancelled. Now The Terror did a little better, but there's no way AMC didn't expect more from a show that critically acclaimed and that expensive. I like all these shows a lot, but they haven't had a fraction of the impact of Mad Men, let alone Breaking Bad. Maybe that's because people are only paying attention to streaming services now, or because they were just too niche. But I can't help but feel like AMC's image just isn't what it used to be. It's not a destination that people look to for shows anymore. And a lot of that, I think, kind of has to do with their biggest hits and its mediocre spinoffs. AMC has tried to repeat the success of The Walking Dead many times, and not just with spinoffs. Preacher was an attempt to take a beloved, ultra-violent comic book and put it on the small screen. The exact formula that worked so well for them before, and this time it kind of worked, but only kind of. Critics liked it well enough, and I know it has a lot of diehard fans, but I'm gonna be honest, I've not watched a lot of it, but I just don't think it was quite the hit that AMC thought it needed. That's not a knock on the show itself, but this was a big show that they gave a talking preacher spinoff to that aired directly after the pilot. A good idea first developed by AMC for Talking Dead as a way to get an extra hour of very solid ratings for basically no money. But that only works if the show is such a massive hit that even its viewership runoff is impressive. And that was never really the case for Preacher. I have nothing against this show, but it was clearly built to be the next Walking Dead phenomenon, and never quite was. Which makes sense, those are just tough expectations to place on a show. And I think AMC fundamentally didn't understand why The Walking Dead took off the way it did. It wasn't a massive hit because everyone in the world was just waiting on the edge of their seat for the adaptation of the best-selling Image comic. I mean, I was, but comic books are still pretty niche. No, people tuned in droves because it was a TV show about zombies that had the expensive production quality of a movie. And as hard as it is to imagine now, that was really novel at the time. Like, shows don't get much more easy to market than The Walking Dead, but Preacher just isn't that. The Preacher comic is really weird, in a way that's cool but hard to convey in an ad, whereas Please Watch This, there will be a ton of zombies that look great in it, just isn't. Into the Badlands was another interesting show that I only watched a little bit of and kind of met the same fate. Neither were failures, and they both lasted for 4 seasons, but they didn't garner the critical attention of Breaking Bad or the ratings of Walking Dead. Now, it's getting harder and harder for shows not made for Netflix or Disney Plus to get noticed at all, and looking at AMC's current lineup makes that reality painfully clear. Other than their interesting anthology shows, every scripted drama they have on is a spin-off, not counting The Walking Dead itself. I mean, even their one reality show is basically built off the star power of The Walking Dead. Now, granted, Better Call Saul is a really incredible show that I think can stand proudly next to Breaking Bad, but I don't think it's a great sign when your whole channel is being steered almost entirely by spin-offs of aging hits. It feels like for a while, AMC was trying everything it could to be known for something other than just that incredible 3-year run from 2007 to 2010. But even the shows that I've loved on the channel since, and many more that I didn't even have time to mention, like Feed the Beast, just haven't connected with a large viewership at all. Maybe that's not AMC's fault, and all of it comes down to the fact that viewership habits and the way we consume TV has changed a lot since 2010. But I think at least some of it can be chalked up to the executives being too hell-bent on both milking The Walking Dead and trying to recreate the exact circumstances that made it huge. They've been cursed by the fact that many of their best shows, like Halt and Catch Fire and Lodge 49, are just incredibly hard to market and don't really have an easy elevator pitch. And their shows that did have that, like the one about spies during the American Revolution, Turn, Washington Spies, or their show where Pierce Brosnan played a cowboy, The Sun, were just kind of underwhelming. I'm not cheering against AMC. They've made a lot of shows I really love, and I hope they make a few more of them before everything gets swallowed whole by the streaming giants. But I think it can't be denied that they fumbled some incredible success. They were absolutely on top of the TV world in 2012, and that's just not the case anymore. They are still developing new shows, and hopefully some of them will catch on. But as its biggest heavy hitter limps along to all-time low ratings, and Saul heads into its final season as well, it's hard not to notice the irony of a crumbling TV channel that's now almost entirely based on people living in a rundown, dying husk of a world that no longer exists.
One day, folks is gonna colorize us.
Edit us.
And add commercials.
Watch American movie classics.
I guess if AMC showed us anything, it's that we have to keep moving forward and changing, and learning is a big part of that. Thankfully, that doesn't have to be a painful process that happens in the classroom. On Brilliant, you can learn at your own pace. Brilliant is a problem-solving app and website that gets you to think like a scientist or mathematician by guiding you through problems. They'll take something like statistics or physics and break them up into smaller, more easily digestible concepts, presenting you a clear line of reasoning every step of the way, and helping you arrive at a mastery of these subjects. You're not sitting through boring lectures, you're getting to apply your own analysis and critical thinking skills to everything you're doing while getting the help you need to break it all down. I find math really intimidating, but Brilliant makes it approachable and even fun, as it gives me the tools I need to learn a wide variety of topics, from fun foundational logic to software development and more. If that sounds interesting to you, go to brilliant.org/midnight and sign up for free. The first 200 people to go to that link will get 20% off the annual premium subscription.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once, because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.